Okay, good evening, everyone. This is June 22nd, Wednesday, here at Town Hall Room 119. This is the RTM Public Works Committee special meeting dedicated to purchase of Great Island. So, we have asked for Monica and Ed to join us this evening. We're particularly interested in information relating to testing, and we need to move into an executive session in order to conduct that discussion. So I need a motion to move into executive session. Waddy, I'll take your motion. Thank you. Do I have a second? I have a second from Jeff. All those in favor, raise your hands. Okay, we have a complete agreement.
Is someone in charge of taking minutes for this?
Yes, this evening,
Oh, thank you.
Jackie is
Lucky you, Jackie. Lucky you.
By the way, you had quite the meeting.
All right, we need to orders for the executive session.
I think I did okay.
What, Rolf, do I
No, I don't
take
think
the
so.
minutes?
No.
Okay.
All right, fellas, I'm going to carry you with me here. Hopefully we don't get cut off. You all right with that?
going with you?
Yeah, we're
Yes.
all going.
Yeah.
This part can't be recorded because it's not,
Well, why wouldn't
it's
we
not
just turn the
public.
camera?
Yeah.
I don't know.
This seems like,
Them's the rules?
I'm just following orders.
Sorry.
All right. Well,
Okay,
can I have a motion to come out of executive session? Frank Edelman, thank you. Second, Eric Golis, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're out of executive session. TV 79, you can proceed to record. Okay, so if I may lead off.
just for time, it's now 7:15, so we were in executive session about 13 or 14 minutes,
Roughly speaking,
for anyone who's,
interested to know.
exactly.
Okay. I think one of the topics that was discussed quite a bit in our first meeting 1 week ago was the issue of the management of the property. Assuming it's purchased, what would be the way in which the property would be managed, both from a day-to-day operational viewpoint, but also from the financial viewpoint? Okay, so I'd like to put that out as a starting point and hear what you would say to that.
Well, we are looking at, right now, well, first of all, who visited the property? I feel like I saw all of your names on there. Why
Yeah,
did
we
you
had
put
a
them?
big turnout.
realtors.
Okay, right.
Yeah, we had a big turnout.
So you've all seen, and I hope you all feel it's a pretty special place. We, as far as going forward, as far as committee goes, we would look to form a committee and take a look at what we could do there, modeling it perhaps after the Conservancy model for Waveney and for Greenwich Point, and running it like we run all of our other committees very successfully on the Board of Selectmen level. As far as the actual businesses there, the tenants that are there have leases that are either a month-to-month or expire March 31st. So this, I want to stress that whatever we do as far as the possibilities, did everybody see the vision plan, the PowerPoint? Right?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so you saw the zone kind of concept. Those were all possibilities of things that we could do there, right? We can't do all of them, and we may not even want to do any of them. But I want to stress that this will be a well-thought-out plan, and we will have terrific people working on it, but it will take time. This is probably a 2 to 10 year project. And we anticipate that, we hope that the tenants will continue to generate the free cash flow that they are of, I think it's $470,000. And while we are working on our plan and design.
Okay, does anybody have any follow-up questions along the lines of that?
Sure, and Monica, I've raised in the public session, I've raised in our initial, excuse me, in our initial Public Works meeting, that my biggest concern here is governance. And I've shared with you in public, I think it's a captivating property, and I would love to be able to give this to future generations. I think it has I agree with the strategy, it's a signature piece. And I think a lot of people around the table do as well, so I don't know if we need to belabor that. But I'm very, very concerned about the governance of both what goes on the island and how it impacts us financially. As far as what goes on the island, I have my concerns, and I've shared them publicly, about a Board of Selectmen committee, which is subject to the whims of the Board of Selectmen, which can be disbanded at any time, which is basically a delegation of the Board of Selectmen's powers, but is still a creature of the Selectmen. As opposed to, I've been advocating for an independent Great Island Commission that would be a more formally structured setup that would be more modeled on the Sewer Commission. The Sewer Commission is called into being under Chapter 103 of the Connecticut General Statutes. And I think there's an opportunity to do something similar for an independent Great Island Commission that would that would have more independent power to make the decisions. Again, just to more have a structural guarantee of transparency, but also continuity, to be doing its work in public in the open, and to avoid the kind of groupthink that I think has led us down to the wrong path in a few prior examples. I agree, we've got a lot of examples of committees that have done great work, and you remember our Pedestrian Infrastructure Advisory Committee, which I think was a great example, as well as the building committees for HHR and the ones prior. But we've seen Board of Selectmen committees that have gone terribly astray. Right? There was a committee that supported the shuffle. There's a committee that supported the Pear Tree Point project, which I think, in retrospect, I'm not a fan of. I don't want to relitigate those, but I think those were still Board of Selectmen committees that I think were subject to too much groupthink. So I want to suggest to you that you create an independent Great Island Commission with a more formal structure. That'll be much more independent. From a financial point of view, if you model that on the Sewer Commission, and there are ways, again, to do this within the Connecticut General Statutes, I would encourage you to give this commission the assessment authority to pay for what's on Great Island. Ideally, in my view, the acquisition, the remediation, the development, the maintenance, everything, to keep it out of the property tax, to not muddle our existing budget process. We already know that the budget process is governed by sharp pencils, and there's a lot of sharp pencils in the room tonight here. We don't need the pencils to be any sharper on the priorities that we're already dealing with. I would want to have the independent Great Island Commission insulate the financials of the Great Island from the town budget.
Thank you, Frank. I will take that under consideration. But we are elected. This town elects their Board of Selectmen, so I do take issue with you thinking that we are not capable of managing this project. I think that we are, but I will take your comments under consideration. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on that particular topic? If not, yes, sir. Wayne Fox.
Just one quick point. Frank, I think your issues are fair ones and they're good ones. I can tell you that we have looked into that a little bit at the behest of the first selectman. I've spoken with folks from Canaan, who has a system which we set by ordinance, approved by you folks, has a body of 12 people. What I thought was interesting is the way the system works. This Conservancy Board is used as a fundraiser. They come up with ideas, they come up with concepts, but then when they come up with a specific concept, it doesn't become law until it goes to the other boards in town. So the first selectman has said to me that the balance that has existed up there, and the way that it has worked, is very beneficial, and he would recommend it to any other town. I think that is a concept which may well deal with some of your concerns, which your concerns are fair ones.
So Wayne, that first of all, that's great. Thank you very much for that. And that I would love to learn more about that.
Frank, that's the Waveney Conservancy that I've mentioned a few times.
Okay, I'm not familiar with Waveney Conservancy, I'm sorry. What I would say is, as a point of difference though, is when the town of New Canaan acquired Waveney, I believe the grounds and the fields were already in place there. So that conservancy didn't have to decide what went on the property, they had to figure out how to manage it, which is one step simpler than what we have to decide here.
But they tell me that they have had additional concepts that have been added to the property. I think one was a skating rink, which he said worked out well because they came up with money, they came up with ideas, but they couldn't do anything until the elected officials made the normal determinations that elected officials such as yourself do.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that the Great Island Commission would be exempt from all the other processes in town.
Yeah, all right.
Coordination.
We're running out of time.
Got it, sorry.
So,
thank you, Rolf.
I'd like to move on to what is more public works oriented with regards to the fact that, assuming we buy the property, there are short-term issues that are going to be needed to address, and we discussed and identified some of these during our first meeting. Road systems, public restrooms, parking, ground maintenance, and of course the maintenance of the buildings in terms of at least their structural integrity until such time that any decisions are made to develop them further or tear them down. So starting off with the road systems right now, it appears to be certainly coming off of Goodwives River Road. It's a single lane road coming up to the circle, okay, so that's to me an issue. And then within the Great Island itself, the road systems going through the island, you know, people have talked about that you would ingress from one direction and egress out from the other direction and make it basically a big one-way circle to go through the property. Is that the plan at this time?
That's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
It's a possibility, but we have looked at widening the road, because I think that's, yeah, I think that of the things that you laid out, I would say, well, first, the maintenance of the buildings is included in that price that the buildings, that line item, there's 100,000 that's already included for maintenance of the buildings in that, the rental, okay? As far as the parking goes, we have looked at different options, but again, it'll depend on what is done there, right? But Ed penciled out a few possibilities, and he also took a look at the road. So Ed, do you want to go through that?
Sure.
Maybe give a range as far as numbers go?
Absolutely. We did take a look at the road structure, the widening of the roads, and not all the sections need widening, to be honest with you, but we did take an overview of going with a 20-foot minimum, 22-foot minimum roadway, easily passable for 2 vehicles, emergency vehicles, and so on. And we did come up with a range to do specifically the area coming from Goodwise River Road to the turnaround. We all know that's a little tight.
Yeah.
We need to be widened, absolutely. There are some other sections though along throughout the whole facility that need some widening. So the number I worked up somewhere between $400,000 to $600,000, depending on structural walls. If we need them, it didn't look like a whole lot of that. We can do some grading. There are some tree issues that need to be addressed. Maybe we could save some of them, but it was a quick overview, maybe from about 30,000 feet, to see where would we be with a number. And that's pretty much what I came up with for that. The other part was parking.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of fun with that. I did explain that to the first selectman. I just happened to see a state park 60 minutes to, and they had these parking little offshoots, little parking areas, little
Pocket parks.
pocket parks, thank you.
Pocket parks.
So I did
like
that along the roadway, and I thought I kept it gravel, because I didn't think we needed any more asphalt.
Yes.
So I came up.
So
with
that would be similar to Highland Farm?
No, not really. Think of driving up and having maybe 10 spaces off the side of the road.
And he's talking about the
Pull off.
surface.
Oh, about the surface?
Yeah, the gravel.
Yes, that's correct, that's correct. And I did come up with a gravel number, that's somewhere around $300,000 to $350,000. I did figure the asphalt number too, just in case people were concerned about having hard surfaces, and that's closer to, $500,000 to $550,000. So we're playing in those 6-figure range, mid to higher 6-figure range on some of these things. So.
Yeah, one other issue, again, and this is just to open the, quote, open the park, so to speak, okay? Bare minimum, if you will. I mean, we would have to have some form of a restroom, I would assume, because there really is no restrooms there. I mean, there are bathrooms, I'm sure, in the individual homes that are being rented, but in terms of public access, there is none.
Well, and they're not hooked up to sewage.
That's the other issue is, yeah, I believe those houses are all in septic tanks.
Yeah, they're all septic.
They're all
Yeah,
septic
so
systems.
that's another issue.
We're off in fairness, there's no sewers at Woodland Park, there's no sewers at Selleck's Woods. I mean, there's no bathrooms there.
No bathrooms.
There's public parks.
Okay?
Well,
So-
we would put bathrooms in, but again, that's a little bit of what we're going to use it for.
Right, so you're saying that relates more to what's the use before we start worrying about anything such as restrooms?
Right.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about the roadways? Because when I visited, you have the circle, so you go off of Good Wives, there's like a little 1-lane situation, and then once you get to the traffic circle, there is another exit that goes out to,
Yeah.
thank you. Is that a private road? Because it's quite a wide road. It's a 2-lane chained off exit.
Right.
And that's not something
Yeah.
that the town could like negotiate to use so that we wouldn't have to widen any roads? Have we looked into that?
As far as purchasing that, no.
Purchasing, or maybe like, I don't know, renting or having rights to it so that the roads would be fine as they were, because that way you could have an in and an ingress and an egress without widening anything, because there's an in and an out then. It could just be a giant one-way situation. But I don't know who owns it or why it's chained off. I
I
know
believe
none of
that's part of
that.
the Ziegler property,
It
isn't it?
That was my assumption.
Yeah.
It is.
But I don't know, maybe they'd be open to that,
Maybe.
to not have to touch any of the,
Right. We'll look into it.
okay, cool. That's all I have.
So, does Steinkraus own that road that runs from Goodwives to the circle?
Yes.
Okay, so that is then being sold.
That road is part of this. It's like a 1.2 acre piece of property that's included. in
Okay,
this.
and are there other people in the area that need that road to access to their residences?
No, not at this
Okay.
point.
Is that gatehouse part of the purchase?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
I've always liked that gatehouse.
It's really pretty.
It's kind of cool.
It's really pretty. The other part that's not included, but does benefit the island are the two deeded open spaces. Those it's like a kidney kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Those
we're
are kind
familiar.
of on the island, but they're not part of this parcel. So just as you know, people have asked, so this is totally separate from the Ziegler. So this property was separated last July. And the parcel that was for sale, and I think it was 18, included all of this. This parcel that we are looking at now is strictly the Steinkraus family.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
How much acreage does that take out? Did that take out? Doing
20 some odd, I believe.
Yeah, this,
Makes sense.
yeah, this parcel we have is a little over 60,
Yeah,
62.
thank you.
I just had a question, it's not really Public Works related, but do we have any plans to open this up to people outside of the town of Darien? Because I noticed when I tried to go to Todd's Point, you cannot go to Todd's Point, even if you walk, you cannot go there. So I just didn't know if any discussions had been made about keeping this for the people of Darien exclusively, much like Greenwich keeps Greenwich Point exclusive to the residents.
You know, I think this will be considered, I could see this being included in our beach pass.
Okay.
Access for it, so you can buy you can buy beach pass
Correct.
for if you're out of town, so
Absolutely. Okay.
something like that.
Cool. Just curious. Because that would help a lot of the traffic concerns, I think, that people have.
Anything else?
Are there any other questions? Because this is a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
You don't have people come
Sure.
of this
Is this Patrick?
level of government very often. All right, who's speaking?
Hey, Rob, it's Ian. The question for me is, so if you intended to keep the existing leaseholders for a while, and we want to open to the public, or from a public works perspective, has there been any thought put into what we might have to do to keep horses separate from people? Because if we're going to keep the horses, right, they use a bunch of that space, and what we saw with Oxford Hunt Club is you kind of had to put a barrier between. So what investment are you going to have to make around keeping the horses on the property?
So Ian, I think at this point, what we're contemplating is not opening it up to the public until we have a plan, and I can anticipate that plan taking a little bit of time to develop. So until we have, some parking is a big driver here, right? Have you visited the property?
Yes, he's been there.
Okay, so you parked over by the stable, so parking is a problem. So until we address the road issue and the parking issue, we will have it closed to the residents. And once we figure that out and we get our plan in place, then I'm hoping that the tenants will stay until that time. So there'll be no residents. There'll be no residents on the property for the foreseeable future. And the leases, the earliest that the leases run out is next March. So it's.
So, understood, and some of those leases you said are month to month.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming those month to month would have to be codified
Right,
in
absolutely.
some form of legal document that will have a time period on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're basically locking ourselves into a period of time in which the residents will not have access.
Right.
So, would like to understand their thinking around that, and that's part of why I actually support Frank's idea of sort of the independent commission to make some of these decisions, because we're going to be locking in for multiple years worth of time.
Multiple years worth of
Time.
time? It depends on what, what kind of projects we want to do there, but I think until we have a plan, it's important to generate as much income as we can from the property, and that's what we will be doing. So, and I think if you're a tenant, you visited the property, and so you saw that there are no fences, there's no way to keep residents off of somebody's backyard, right? So, I think we have a lot of terrific places to visit in town, and I know this is exciting and new, and it'll be fantastic once it's provided to our residents in a safe way. And until that time, I hope that the tenants will stay.
Monica, related to the safety question, is there a security plan for after the purchase of the island, something that would prevent people entering the property from the water, say?
Oh, from the water? We have to work on that. This is our due diligence ends in August, and we have a 30-day to close, so I am confident that we will have a plan in place by September 7th.
Okay.
What about, sorry, you gotta run?
We do, because we need to go into executive session at the start of that meeting, but go ahead, Eric, really quick.
Using the parking lot at the beach for, if there are events on Great Island,
I think, but again, Eric, it comes down to what do people want there? Do people want an event where that much additional parking will be needed? And that's something that the community will come up with. I'm excited to hear what people's thoughts are. So, thank you.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
And appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate
Okay,
it.
team.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jeff.
Bye.
Thanks, Ed.
Take care now.
Bye, guys, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I love a parade.
And they're out.
A lot of town knowledge just left alone,
45 minutes. Okay, thank you.
for sure.
So here we are.
Feel like we were just here.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
So Rolf, you distributed 3 resolutions. I mean, I'm gonna be honest and say I haven't had a chance to read them. So I know. They came today, right?
Yes, they did.
Came out
There is a finance and budget meeting starting right now. And Jack Davis sent that out because I do often sit in on those meetings. They're having it virtually. And so, yeah, he sent these out in advance of the meeting they are conducting at this very moment. So these, as I understand it, are the resolutions because everybody's been saying, what exactly is the resolution? And here they are. Okay?
Are they 3 of the same thing?
Well, I'll read briefly what I think the order is. If we were sitting in on the finance and budget meeting, we might know better. The first is more of a general resolution. Whereas the town of Darien has an opportunity to purchase 60 plus or minus acres of land commonly known as the Great Island. And whereas said property is currently owned by the members of the Stein-Krause family. And whereas the Board of Selectmen has approved the acquisition, the Board of Selectmen has approved the funds to acquire said property, and the Board of Finance has approved the funding of said property and the use of bonds and/or short-term notes for the acquisition of said property. And whereas under the applicable provisions of the Charter, in particular Section 48F, Representative Town Meeting has the authority to approve the sale of the acquisition of property by the town. So therefore now it be resolved that the RTM of the Town of Darien hereby approves the authorized purchase of 60 plus or minus acres of property commonly known as Great Island and authorize the first selectman to take necessary steps and execute the necessary documents to acquire said property. So I think that's the lead off, that's the kickoff, is that the RTM votes and says, yes, we should buy it, no, we shouldn't.
But my review of all 3 of them, it says exactly the same thing, just whether it's 2 pages or
Yeah, it then goes on to the next, what I believe is the next one, which basically has almost all the same wording as I've just read off to you, except they give a specific number in this one, okay? And representative town meeting hereby approves some $103,465,000 for the purchase of property, bonds and notes, okay?
The
So
second
that
one has the bonding resolution attached to it.
So, yeah, so this one is actually with, you know, what the money is, okay? And that's certainly an important part. Okay, and then the final one is a resolution of the RTM to establish a special revenue fund to appropriate funds to be deposited into said account for the management of Great Island, okay? Whereas there has been a request to create a special revenue fund, appropriate funds to be deposited into said account for the management of Great Island. The initial source of funds is the income from rental property. Going forward, this will be part of the annual budget process. And whereas on an annual basis, rental income is approximately $800,400, the estimated expenses of $370,000. And whereas the fiscal year 23, the town anticipates 6 months of revenue, and any funds that are collected and not expected will remain in the new fund and will be used for other Great Island expenses. So therefore now be it resolved that a special revenue fund hereby created for the management of Great Island. Okay, and then it goes on to say that we would approve this specific amount of $400,200 for management of the island. Okay, so they are prepared to set up a separate account, separate from the general fund, dedicated for the management of the property. Okay.
So just as we read that, the first one is an administrative action. We have a responsibility as the RTM administratively to approve this transaction, and so the selectmen are coming to us to get our administrative approval. The second one comes to us as in our function as the legislature of the town and the appropriators of money.
Right.
And so the second one's saying, okay,
Here's the
just
money.
like we spend money at the May budget meeting, now we're spending money and we're gonna appropriate money, and here's a bonding resolution to do that.
Correct. And then the third
Excuse me.
is,
And the third one is, I think, a Jack Davis creation, which all respect to Jack, but Jack, I think, is worried about how to administratively manage the dollars and cents in a transitional year.
Yeah.
And how, so that's more, I don't wanna minimize that, but it's more kind of in accounting details, how are you gonna get the debits and credits to line up in the right places? Which, you know, if you approve of one, you're gonna approve of the other two.
But it does sound like a separate, they want to have it separate from the town's main fund.
No, it's still embedded as part of the town budget.
Yes.
They're creating a separate account within, like, to administratively manage this as another line item in the account,
I see.
right? But they're not saying this is out of the mill rate.
Doesn't it say it's out of the general fund though, but that's a different.
The general fund is exactly what supports the mill rate.
Right, no, I said, but doesn't it say that it's out of the general fund? It's not.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
yeah, I believe it is
specifically
separate. It is to
Separate.
separate
So that would be
that.
They're gonna separate
I don't
it.
know it
Yeah.
anywhere near as close to you do, but I think it just specifically
They
says it's not.
said that it's gonna be supported by the income from.
By the income from the.
Yeah, which is separate from the mill rate, is
Right.
how I understand it.
Right,
The management of it, not the purchase of
Right.
it, but the management
Right.
of it, which is what we want.
I
Well,
mean,
I think it's one part of what I think people are
Well, it's
interested in.
only for a year though,
So
right?
Right.
remember, it's called a special revenue fund. It's not talking about the spending side. I think this is only talking about the receipts.
no,
from
it
the
says how much they're gonna allocate to spend.
It did
Okay,
mention.
the third whereas is, whereas going forward, this will be part of the annual budget process.
Right?
Yeah, it does say that specifically, and on an annual basis.
But if it's a one-year situation,
Yeah, see,
why is
that's
it talking about
what
the
I'm
annual budget process?
Yeah, it does, it
Unless it's
steps
not
it
a
out.
one-year situation.
At least as you read it, I think it steps it out.
I think it's only until March, and then there's no more revenue
Well,
from the rent.
you know, my own feeling is that I don't think we should get too locked in our heads about what the time frame is gonna be per se, because I don't think anybody really knows. Okay, I think when whatever is formed, be it conservancy or otherwise, to try and figure out what to do with this property, I think it's gonna take quite some time, A, to figure it out, B, to get it out in the public, C, to get a consensus that, yeah, that's what we should do, so on and so forth. So this isn't gonna happen overnight. I don't think it's even gonna happen within a year, frankly, myself.
Right, it's a bit of a
Okay.
trust fall.
So, I think there's a very good possibility, again, this is my opinion, this is my feeling, that, you know, the month-to-month leases are gonna go for a number of months, and even the leases that expire in March could go beyond that as well as the horse stables, because it's generating income. So you better have all your ducks lined up
Yeah.
real good before you cut off that income.
Has anybody been reached out to by any more constituents since our last meeting?
I received a random phone call from someone I have never met before.
Somebody on Blueberry?
They can't.
Lives on Relihan Road,
Okay. From.
which is right near where
Well, that's my,
that
that's my, right.
I-95
That's sort of interesting.
Oh, yeah.
duct comes through and all that water flows from under the I-95, and she's a more senior person in town. She's lived in Darien for 40 years,
Okay.
and she was like, no.
Hard no for her.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Really,
Does anyone-
my experience is my older neighbors are for it,
Yeah, I talked to
which I was fascinated by.
someone that was very excited
Yeah.
about it, that
Same.
is in her
Patrick, you still with
70s.
us?
Same.
I am, thank you.
Yep. Sorry to let y'all know Patrick's with us.
Oh, good.
All
I
right,
was
so you got another
gonna,
phone call in.
I
All
was
right.
just gonna,
And this time I called him.
Patrick, I was gonna just ask
wanna-
to read your,
Yeah.
but why don't you just have,
Patrick, do you have in front of you your comments? Would you like to read them?
Sure, I'll read them, and I promise to be brief, and I want to apologize to the committee members for not being there in person. This was not planned, but I have spent a great deal of time and effort to try and understand I've toured it like I think all of you. I've looked over a couple of different financial analyses, and I've also spoken to quite a few, compared to other issues that I've talked to constituents about, I've talked to more constituents about this. And I have to, I probably should go and do the calc. It's probably about 75% are in favor, and there were a few that were not in favor, and it was primarily because of the financial concerns. And one person suggested they were concerned about buying a property without a plan. All of that having been said, one of my RTM colleagues, and I can't remember which one, I thought described it best, and that was, we are stewards, and we are elected to be stewards of our town, and that responsibility is, far and wide. It's not just for our present voters and constituents. It's for, looking out for the future of our town. And I think with that as a backdrop, while I do have some concerns, near-term concerns about the financial impact on existing voters and existing taxpayers, let me take that back. Not the voters, I'm concerned about the taxpayers. I am in favor of the purchase, and I'm in favor of this resolution.
All right, your comments are duly noted.
Thank you.
All right, Ian, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
All right. So, would you have anything you'd like to say about the decision buy or not to buy, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, my comments, I'll keep them brief. Look, I think Patrick said something great, which is this is a long-term play, right? This is not about the short term, it's about the long term. And given that, I am generally biased in favor, but candidly, I remain a little on the fence because of the financial considerations. And the biggest thing for me is, how are we going to correctly generate the necessary income to correctly manage the property post-acquisition? So leave aside the $130 million. All the revenue we're going to need to correctly invest in the property, make it what it needs to do over a long period of time. And so I would be a lot more comfortable if the Board of Selectmen adopted the independent commission, as Frank is suggesting, which does not appear to be the case. But I do think over
All right, duly noted. Jeff, are you still there?
I am.
All right, Jeff, would you care to speak?
Just briefly, not a lot to add to the discussion we've already had. I do believe that this is a short-term and long-term asset to our town. And I also believe from a public works perspective that this adds a short-term and a long-term burden on the public works and administration of our town. So we need to be very careful with how we manage this going forward. That said, and due to the great value that I think that over a very long period of time that we can derive from this, I'm very much in favor of the purchase. And I think we need to go in eyes wide open with the public works impact of the decision that we're taking. With an eye to not depriving the rest of the town from needed public works enhancements and improvements for the sake of the purchase. With that, if I were there and if I were voting, I would be voting as part of the Public Works Committee to recommend to the full RTM that from our perspective, I think it's a good purchase.
All right, thank you for your input. Anybody else want to speak up? Yes, Karen.
So I think the biggest concern, so first off, I should say the people that I heard from were overwhelmingly in favor. I did have the financial concerns brought up repeatedly. Seeing is that the guy that I am laying next to every night is on the Board of Finance and has firsthand knowledge of, and that is my husband, by the way.
We were wondering, right? And it could have been, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm just saying.
I had to add a little humor to that.
Thank you.
So, but anyway, and Rolf and I did walk over to catch the end of the Board of Finance meeting last week.
Last week, yeah.
So that's the first time I'd seen my husband actually in person. Yeah, so it was kind of exciting. But, you know, I was actually, I think, and I was going to put Jim Palin on the spot, but I knew they had to get over to Jack Davis or he'd be very upset. So I didn't get him to stop. But, you know, they've really thought this plan out. They did their due diligence and 6-1 overwhelmingly voted in support of financing this. And I will say that they thought that the only one that voted against it, everything he said up until the point where he voted no, it seemed he was in support of it, so they were taken by surprise. So I just thought everybody should know that. But also that they were really astounded, even my husband, of how really it's not going to impact our each taxpayer as much as you know. I think a lot of people are suggesting from the letters that we all received from RTM today, from Krista. So I think there's a lot of misinformation going on, and I suggest everybody go listen to the meeting because the financial impact of how they have done it is so, I mean, listen, to me right now every dollar counts, but I really do think we have to, as Patrick said to begin with, we have to look at this as a long-term acquisition, that what it's going to add to our community far exceeds what it's going to cost us now. And I think in as little as, I think you said last week about how, was it you that said like,
If it was smart, I said it.
yeah, there you go. Somebody said like and I just don't, about whether or not this is like a 5-year net gain. I can't remember who said it. Was it you?
I think it was me.
Was it you? Okay.
I wasn't here.
I didn't think you were here.
Stop taking credit for me.
So, but anyway, I think that again, if you look at a 5-year plan of what it's going to add to you, and if I turned around and was going to sell my house in 3 years, would it add value to my house?
Jeff who was sitting
Jeff,
right
okay.
here. Yeah.
You know, that's what you've got to kind of look at, because I do hear when people are talking about New Canaan, they talk about Waveney. When they talk about Greenwich, they talk about Todd's Point.
100%.
So I think we all have to, as much as an enormous job that this is going to be for us over the next couple of years, I think that the benefits are going to far outweigh the risks that we have for this. So I'm very much in favor of it. Thank you.
All right, I don't know if any of you had a chance to go out on the website. I would encourage you to do so, because this is one of the pages that is in the presentation that shows
Debt service.
the debt service. Now, I would point out to you though, as I understand it, and anybody who understands differently, correct me, but I understand this is for the impact from the purchase.
That's correct, and that's current debt plus HHR plus green is the purchase of Grid Island.
Yes.
This does not include any operating increases to put something on there or any long-term improvements we would put on there that might be bonded. It also does not include a number of things that are in the longer-term capital plan that are nonetheless expected to be spent, but not yet spent or bonded. Like if we know there's a fire engine coming in
Fire engine.
26, that expected bond is not in that list.
What else have we been bonding? We've been bonding road and sidewalks.
Yep, well, there's a number of things that we have in a capital plan that are anticipated for the next 5 years that are highly, highly likely to be spent, whether they're in schools or in infrastructure or in anything else, but that are not included in that picture.
Okay, so I just passed that along. There's another one right after that that kind of gives a little bit more information in specifics of percentages of increase and that sort of thing, and dollars of debt service.
Do you know if we're locked into the rates if we do this? Because they're going up as we speak.
No, they're gonna issue,
No, it's
they're gonna issue notes for now, just to carry it until such time that they can figure out how they're gonna really set up a whole bond plan for it.
So Waddy, I encourage you to, I believe our District 6 caucus was taped on Monday night.
It's on the website.
Okay, so that became a graduate level seminar in municipal bond finance. Because we had a number of people in the room who were expert in that. I am not, but I certainly learned a lot. But you're right, the interest rate risk is certainly to the upside right now.
Sure.
So,
as far as
Sounds thrilling.
the other thing that's, again, part of that presentation is this, it's kind of like a pro forma. If you have a house, appraised value of $1.2 million, okay, and an assessed value of $854,000, your taxes fiscal year 2023 would be $14,700. But as we go through the purchase, the taxes coming through at fiscal year 2028 would change from 14.7 to 17.1, okay, per year, per annum.
And so this was
Okay.
discussed also in detail at our caucus. And so the annual amount of taxes would be going up by the 2,400, and the amount of that 2,400 increase that's attributable to Great Island would be about $650 to $700 in your annual tax bill. The other amount of the increase, the other 3/4 would be operating increases or the HHR.
The HHR project. Plus, they're still not finished completely bonding, as I understand it, the Ox Ridge.
Correct.
That's not a done deal in terms of bonding, okay? So, for the near-term future, you're gonna see each year, it's just gonna go up a bit more every year, depending upon your value and where you fall in the overall scheme of the mill rate. And then it's supposed to level out after about 5 years, and then slowly.
How much control do we have of all this spend that's supposed to be going out of the schools? Which I'm assuming is the HHR or whatever it's called. I think there's like $81 million that's supposed to be spent on the schools in the next couple of years.
It's bonded.
No, I understand that, but that's bonded. But what, it seems to me, is that all necessary?
I think so.
I think the progress of those projects is beyond, is it necessary? It's in motion as we speak. I mean, that's happening.
Like redoing, especially Ox Ridge.
Well, Oxbridge is gonna open up.
Well, no, Oxbridge is
You know,
done,
the-
so
yeah,
that's,
yeah.
but I was like thinking about the other school.
The HHR.
Yeah, that, like, all the other stuff.
Constantly
that
It seems like a
yeah.
lot of money. Most of that's salaries, isn't it?
No,
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 no, no.
no,
No,
there's
this is of
work,
the
there's
new
like
project.
renovations.
No, there's three
Yeah.
elementary
Renovations
schools.
need to
Right.
be
There's
done.
Holmes, Hinley, and Royal. And those schools have, as I understand it, been inhabited, so to speak, with temporary classrooms, okay, trailers that,
Oh, yeah.
and portables, thank you. And so there's been a strong movement for quite some time to eliminate them.
Well, they weren't supposed to be there for anything more than a year, and they've been
Right,
there
and
for
they've
like
been there
15
for
years or
a
something.
lot more than that.
I was just curious about how much room there is in toggling some of our bigger expenditures.
Well, didn't we already approve the?
Yeah, that was approved.
That's, I guess my question
May.
is, can we disapprove?
I don't think so.
I'm sorry, I have to say, if that is even a question on the table for anybody in a serious way, you should not be voting for Red Island.
No, I'm not.
Okay? I'm 100% serious, because we have so many people in this town, and some of the best of them just walk right out of the room, who will tell you that they pinch pennies till they scream, their pencils are always sharp, right? They never made a budget they couldn't squeeze, and they're excellent money managers, and I don't take that, I mean that as a compliment, not an insult, right? However, we are a town that has many, many other priorities that are much higher than Great Island. The renovation of the 3 schools that have demonstrable needs to be renovated, which I'm glad we approved at the last meeting. We have a mental health crisis at our high school. We have a number of senior services that are absolutely urgent and need to be fully funded and enhanced and delivered to the best of our ability. And if we don't, if we approve this purchase, I never want to hear the phrase, "I pinch pennies till they scream." Because if we can afford $103 million for Great Island plus everything going on it, we can afford $250,000 at the high school if we need it for mental health. We can afford $250,000 to put, if what kids need is smaller classes and more teachers, we need to be able to do that, because that is much more important. Yeah, I love having the #1 school in Connecticut, I don't mean to take it for granted, but I really care about the quality of the education and quality of life for our kids and our citizens. And if that's not uppermost in our mind, then we're making a mistake. So if we're ready to buy this, then I never want to hear another person say, we don't have money for X. I'm not trying to waste money. I'm not trying to fuel my fireplace with 20s. But I'm not Mr. Burns, right? but if we have this level of discretionary income as a town, then we cannot be stinting on anything else.
But there are expenses at the schools that we have said no to. So what does this mean now? Every year, as part of the budget process, we hear, oh, we're spending too much, we have to tamp down on spending at schools. What's going to prevent us from then saying, well, we really have to tamp down even more? I don't mean to pit the two things against one another.
I don't think, I think you're right, and I think Frank's right too. And so that's part of the whole budgeting process. We're always going to have these discussions about what we're going to spend money and not spend on. Frank, I totally get it and agree with you that those priorities are hugely important and quite different than the Great Island purchase. And
higher.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're higher particular. They always should be higher. Great Island to me is a huge benefit to the town over time. And maybe even in some ways to the health benefit of those kids and everybody else involved, but I wouldn't be the one to make that statement. My thing with Great Island is I look at it from a risk mitigation standpoint, like what's our out? If we screw this up or can't afford it or whatever the deal is, we'll always be able to sell it. Right? And so I get it, and I understand, and I really do like your idea in terms of the management of it. I mean, that just sort of makes sense to me. I clearly got Monica's feeling on it. But we have risk controls here, and if we can't handle it, if you start hearing things, and from Jackie's point, if we start saying, "Oh, we can't do that because we've got to put in a new horse barn," then yes, I totally agree with
The
that.
optics are going to be
But-
terrible. If Norwalk
yeah.
can't buy textbooks in its school,
Right.
and daring horse groomers.
Right, no, I agree. You can't put the two together. So those are great points.
We need organic hay.
Yeah.
And whose decision is it to get out of the deal?
I think
Right.
it'll be, I think it's Frank actually, really, it will be one of those things, and Jackie mentioned it too, and I think we all feel this way. We will know, as a town, it'll be non-political, if we get into a situation.
Boy, that's optimistic. That was the most optimistic.
I'm trying to be.
My respected colleague.
Yeah. I'm trying to say.
That could be a platform that someone runs on, though.
Right.
For first selectmen. You know,
Yeah.
I think Great Island was a disaster, and I'm going to run on it.
And then we unwind it. I mean, that's why I think there's so many benefits to this for the whole town that are much more than maybe what we think they are.
Yeah.
There are some huge unknowns. When I talk to a bunch of people in town, and I haven't been here anywhere as long as some people in this room, everybody feels like it might be moving a little too fast. Everybody feels like there are unknowns. And when you talk all the way through it, this feeling is we can exit if we want to. The downside risk here is controllable, and so it would be a shame to pass it up. But I would argue, and I will say to Monica or anybody else, I do think that this management of this thing is really, really important. That the likelihood of it being successful is much higher of its success if we can put it in this sort of other thing.
Governance.
And if we can't, that's not our decision. I mean, that'll be the voters will vote for it. But I'd prefer to have it, because I'd also prefer, I like the private-public partnership piece, where we get some outside money and we get this thing really being managed. You know, managed
We
like
have
it.
plenty of people that would love to.
Well, and frankly, if you look at some of the people who are supporting
Love
this,
to
those are
support it.
people that I would call up on the phone and be like, yeah, you seem to be a big supporter, you know.
Yeah, you
maybe
might-
Would you
fun.
like a horse barn with your name on
No,
it?
but I'm serious, I think we can really do that, and I think that would
Yeah.
be a really cool way to do it, and I think it would be a
Absolutely.
cool way for the town to look at it.
100%.
And, you know, the kids and the school and people on that property and history and stuff like that should be really good.
Well, it's like,
Go ahead, you go.
they
I'm
were
not gonna
talking
tease
about, they were talking about the ice rink in New Canaan at Waveney. That was 100% done with fundraising. You know, so I think anything is possible. You know, New Canaan, they just didn't give everything to them and continue to give everything. And there's going to be, you're not going to always have the town have to kick in for it. There are going to be people that have their pet projects and say, I want to do a fundraiser for, you know, to upgrade that horse barn or whatever, and get the organic hay and the crappy
Well, yeah,
stuff.
and I think in my, with the last overly optimistic thing, and then I'll go to decaf before these meetings. The town has gone through a really weird period around the politics in the town, the COVID stuff in the town, the Board of Ed in the town, the just general. I left this town for a year and came back, and I was like, what happened here? Like, we didn't used to treat each other like this.
No.
So I'm maybe Great Island in this process has the ability to bring some of that back. Because I swear to God, when I left, this town had some strange stuff going on. But when I came back, people like had sharp knives out. And that was very strange to me.
It's weird.
And I know that there were a lot of outside things, whether it was COVID or whatever, that came into play. But it needs to change. And it's impacting our kids. It's impacting the adults, it is impacting the kids, it's impacting the education and the quality of life here. And so maybe Great Island in some way can fix this.
I'm going to be the pessimist here and say,
Yeah.
well, maybe it could divide us even more.
And to that point, I think
thought it
there are
might have.
people
I
for
don't
whom this tax increase is meaningful. It's certainly meaningful for me. It's meaningful for people who have students at the high school. They're moving to a bring your own device model. You've got to buy a computer for your kid now. These are expenses that they hurt some people more than others.
And I think they need to be acknowledged, and we need to set up a way to make sure that they don't. You know, these are, to Frank's point, if we're gonna sit here and we're gonna say yes to Great Island, then we need to look at some of these other things that are gonna impact, that this tax increase is going to impact, and figure out a way to make that doable. I think that's fair, and that's what this town has always been. It has gotten away from that in the last couple of years, but we've always been pretty fair. And so I would make that case that some of that stuff needs to be taken care of, because it's de minimis money for the town if we're gonna go spend $103 million. You know, so,
Right.
anyway, I'm now deep.
Can I?
Sorry, Patrick.
Can I make a quick point?
Yes.
You
Go
know,
ahead.
we keep- Yes?
Yeah,
You know, we keep talking about the 103 million as though, you know, we're going to spend that, you know, when we approve this. You know, this is going to be paid for over as long a period of time as we can, so that current taxpayers are not funding the entire benefit of all of our, you know, of future taxpayers. So, I mean, that's part of the reason. So, I understand we're going to write a check to the seller as the buyer for 103 million, but we are going to be financing this. And yes, there's a cost to financing it, but this is over as long a period of time as possible. And if our Board of Finance has done nothing else in their incredibly successful run as long as I've been a resident of this town, it's in managing the financing of projects and various things over the proper amount of proper period of time. So that's point number one. Point number two is that to Jeff's point, the public-private partnership for the development of whatever this property turns into, I think is a very key element. And in my mind, I'm taking it at face value and on faith that is going to be a significant portion of the additional expense outlay, not for the operating as much as the build out and repair. So when we look at the mansion, I don't think it's quite 13,000 square feet as was quoted. I think it's a little bit smaller than that, but it needs a lot of work, and I don't think, I would love to have the town, you know, get into a partnership with somebody that's willing to help finance, if not most, all of that. You know, I know if I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but let's not forget that Waveney was taken over by the town of New Canaan, I think back in the 70s. And it took them a long time before that mansion house was usable by the public. I mean, I'm talking about 15 or 20 years.
Yeah,
I hope it won't take that long, but this is a long-term project. That to me is what I think of in terms of long-term. I don't think of 5 years. I think in terms of 20 and 30 years to get this to running like a top. Thanks.
Sorry to jump in one more time. Jim Palin's willing to come back if anybody's got questions. He can, and if not, I'll tell him he doesn't
Anybody
have to.
find it
No.
interesting to have him?
Thanks, no thanks.
Okay.
I think Hallie would like to see him home one of these days.
I
Yeah,
think
he's
he was probably trying to do that and then skip out.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
really
tell him
come here.
if he needs to use that excuse to get
Yeah.
out, that's fine.
I have a question. So a lot of people have talked about having a referendum for this, and what's the rules behind that, and why hasn't that happened?
I wish I could answer your question. I am totally unfamiliar with a referendum process. Frank, you've been around a while, maybe you have some knowledge about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we could talk about the shuffle process. So there was the project called the shuffle, which I'm gonna assume people are familiar with.
No, you better
I'm not.
update everybody, because
I'm
I
not
was here
familiar
for it,
at
and yeah, it was confusing as hell being.
I'm gonna try and be as
give me
neutral
a-
as possible in my description of the shuffle. So.
I was just texting you back that you didn't have to do it if you
So
didn't
very
want to.
briefly, the shuffle was a decision to move the senior center from its old location, which is now an empty lot in Edgerton, into the basement of this building, to move the Board of Ed from the basement of this building to the building at 35 Leroy, which was the old library, and to move some other offices and administrative work around. that was proposed originally by First Selectman Dave Campbell, who was elected, I believe, in 2009, 2008, somewhere around there. And then it was carried forward by Jamie Stevenson. This was ultimately approved. There was a committee, like I said earlier, there was a committee of the Board of Selectmen that supported the shuffle. It passed the committee, it passed the Board of Selectmen, it passed the Board of Finance, it passed the RTM. There were enough people in town who objected to the shuffle that it went to a referendum, and once it was an RTM decision, it was open to be challenged. The referendum was held, and the shuffle was defeated 55-45. However, due to the rules, I'm not sure if it's a town charter or a state rule, in order to undo an act of the RTM, it had to be a 60% threshold to undo the act of the RTM. Therefore, even though the shuffle lost 55-45, it still went ahead. I'm going to editorialize my personal view is that the project was not necessary, and even if you thought it was necessary, it was $1 million to $2 million over budget, and I think a lot of wasted money. End of editorial. So if I apply the shuffle model to this situation, I would think that we don't even have anything to challenge for a referendum until the RTM passes it, if it does pass the RTM. And I'm concerned also that we're in a more complicated situation because we have a contract with a third party. I don't know if you can unwind a contract with a third party, and if
in a certain period of time.
Exactly. I mean, I think there's certain rules as to how the referendum can't take place sooner than a certain date or later than another date. I don't know what those rules are, and I'm not. I mean, again, if we had time, it would be great to get a referendum for people and to have a more kind of fulsome conversation with residents of the town, because I think that as much as we are engaged with this, that we are a small fraction of the folks in town who are, I think, largely not so engaged.
Right, but they do have the opportunity to engage, I think is
100%.
my point. Like, if you look at how many people watch the Board of Finance video on YouTube, it's like 5. It's not like the whole town is watching it, they're just
Really?
writing a letter.
Yeah, three for your family, three for your family, trying to figure out when you're coming home.
I can assure you guys 100% that the contract can't override what's in the town charter, which says there's always a possibility for anything over $50,000 to have a referendum.
Sorry, say it again?
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Yes, the question about would there be time for a referendum? A purchase contract can never override the town charter. Town charter says anything over $50,000, if you don't like can spray paint, the swing set, or an island, there's always an ability to do a referendum. So nothing about this contract, Frank, would ever change what's in the town charter. So
Great.
Interesting.
that's just
It's interesting.
So then to answer the next question is, if someone, and I'm not advocating this in the slightest, but from a procedural point of view, if someone wanted to challenge for a referendum, I think they need a certain number of signatures in order to launch a referendum motion, and that number is fairly high. I think it's something like 10% of the number of people who actually voted in the most recent election, something like that. So it's numbered in the hundreds, or maybe a little over 1,000, which you'd have to collect in a short amount of time. And Jim, you're shaking your head, am I getting this wrong? Or?
it's 5%.
5% of the number of
Still a lot of
registered
people.
voters.
Okay.
But it's not like I needed 25 signatures to get on the RTM. It's much more than that.
No, I had trouble with that. Been here a little too long.
All right, well, since Jim is here, does anybody have any questions, particularly financially related?
I'd like him to kind of review that one chart that you guys held up. And Frank, that you talked about with what you were saying was not included in the stuff. I
Of the
just
debt
think-
service?
Yeah, I just
Jim, we're
think
looking at the debt
that Jim
amount.
should be able to.
Yeah, from the Great Island presentation,
Talk about your perspective.
Yeah, you had your finance
This one right
portion.
here?
No, the other one.
Yeah.
That's one of them. There's one just before that, I think, that we were.
That one.
That?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so what that chart was meant to do was sort of do two things. If you look in, there's a few extra, if you guys want to pass these around here, just maybe share it a little bit on page 4. Here you go. Thanks.
You good?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, so on page 4, that just shows what our existing outstanding indebtedness would look like. You look at the dark gray line on the very bottom, that's our existing debt. The shaded line on top of that is what we've recently added to include the new Oxbridge School, which is about $48 million in par amount, but about $56 million in proceeds. And then the green on top of that is the incremental debt that would be layered in for purchase of Great Island.
Sorry, isn't HHR included with what you described as the Oxford
Yeah.
bid?
Yeah, HHR is like the gray portion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jim, I made the comment, and can you just, I don't know if this, I think this is accurate, but can you just confirm that there are other capital needs that are scheduled out from fiscal '24 through '28 that are anticipated in the town capital plan?
Yeah, that's
That are
included.
not yet bonded, but are not included in
The
this?
HHR debt also includes something like $5 million of debt that has already been approved, not been issued.
Right, but if we're gonna buy a fire truck in fiscal '27 or something like that, that's not included in this, even though it's in the town.
Well, yeah, this includes all debt that's been approved, and it excludes the sort of authorized but unissued debt that we canceled last night at our meeting. So the gray bars include everything that has been issued or approved by the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM to be issued. It doesn't include like a project that might come up in the future.
Okay, so if we want to continue from a public works perspective, we have an ongoing program that includes road repair
Yep.
and building, and there are future years for the spending of that capital. And it's, I think it was bonded this,
Yep.
just recently. Would that be incorporated in this, or is that separate from?
That's not incorporated in the debt, because it's not approved debt. What I did do is I looked back at all of our expenses and our regular capital that we spent every year. And I grew that at 2.5% per year. So it's not, this was meant to be focused on debt projects that were approved and just not yet issued yet, and include Great Island. The other stuff is all sort of blended into something that increases at 2.5% per year. So like, in the end, this entire analysis, what the end product was, over 5 years, the compounded annual growth rate was 3.1%. And F&B were sort of tag teaming up there. They just did a complete analysis from the bottom up, and it shows 3.2%. And I'm sure if we got a few other bankers and financial people, we could get to, you know, something
Another
in
number.
between, slightly higher, slightly lower, but it's,
Hey, this is Patrick. Can I ask Jim a question?
Sure.
Hey, Jim, thanks for being there. I appreciate it. It's Patrick Kane. Is there, on the wish list for me, is there any way that we might finance this over an even longer period of time?
so Patrick, the assumptions we made in this are that HHR, the school debt, would be amortized over 20 years. And we actually don't pay principal for the first 2 years, so we effectively then amortize it over years 3 through 18. And we did the Great Island over 30 years. Municipalities are only allowed to issue 30-year debt for schools and for land purchases, and that's set to expire on June 30th of this year. Luckily, after a fair amount of petitioning and so forth with some of our representatives, as part of the biennial budget that was just recently passed, they extended town's ability to issue debt for 30 years for schools for I think another 5 years. So we still have the ability to issue both of them over 30 years. We did Great Island over 30 years because that'll be bonded first. And the idea being, you know, depending on where we are sort of in the interest rate cycle and so forth, lock in longer term rates for 30-year debt, which is technically 15-year, what we call like average life, right? Because it amortizes over 30 and on average over 15. And then we would issue the school debt in 3 different series over 20 years. Again, a lot of it depends on sort of, you know, how far we go out. You know, the treasury curve is inverted right now, the muni curve is not inverted. So those are a lot of the things that we sort of need to look at and see, you know, where are we trading at that time in an absolute level? Is there some anomaly going on in the markets where you maybe the sweet spot may be to staying at 20? Those are things that we'll sort of look at real time. But we do have the ability to issue the school debt over 30, which would bring down the overall debt service. But I think the concern is the rating agencies like a certain cadence at which you pay down your debt. And we thought by doing all of it at 30, that might push it a little bit. So we built in an assumption of doing HHR over 20 and land over 30. Again, if we pushed all over 30, taxes would be lower, but what's the effect on the sort of, you know, our rating and other things? Again, this is these are decisions we make kind of real time with feedback from our advisor and what we're seeing in the market.
But those are clearly considered long-term bonds.
Correct, yeah, and I think for an asset like Great Island, I mean, it's certainly long-term, it's gonna be here for decades and generations to come. So, yeah, we would look to do that over 30 years.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. And of course, I'll just add one other point. Board of Finance, this is always sort of dynamic in the sense that were the markets to change or were legislation to change, and not that we can factor that into our optimistic planning, but over time, as those things change to our benefit, the town's benefit, the Board of Finance would always look to refinance as they always do. So what we're looking at is the worst case scenario financing. It could get better, but nobody should count on that. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, listen, historically, we've issued a little bit shorter debt because our projects have been a little bit more spread out. They come every 10 years, whether it's a high school, police station, the senior center and so forth. Here, should HHR have been done 6-7 years ago? I think we'd probably all say yes, right? And we had the capacity to do it, but given that we're doing them a little bit more on top of each other, we're gonna stretch out the debt a little bit more. I don't think we're doing anything that's gonna sort of mortgage our future, if you will. We're still going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of statutory bonding limit that, I don't think it can never foresee us banging up against. And I think with respect to the AAA rating, I mean, it's hard to forecast what the rating agencies are gonna do in the future. I view it as low probability that we would actually be downgraded. Okay, if it did happen, we went from AAA to AA1, it could be an extra 7 to 10 basis points. My focus is, as much as it's great to say we're AAA and so forth, I focus on access to the capital markets and cost of access to the capital markets. And those are two things that are number one priority on our list. Number two is, of course, being football state championships, and number three is probably the AAA rating.
Well, and Jim, I would say that for people who don't know the markets as well as you do, we are still at historically low rates, just if you took a really big, long, so, we can, the headline, particularly in this part of the world, rates are going higher, we're gonna get another 75 basis points, we're getting 50 basis points, whatever it is, whatever it's gonna be, we are still at almost all-time historic low numbers. We're coming off of basically free money.
Yeah.
So, and I know Jim knows this a lot better than I do, there's nothing that would cause a massive change right away. I mean, you stress tested this thing 6 different ways a Sunday, I'm sure. And even with another 75 basis points, even with another 100 basis points, you've got room.
We ran the numbers about 125 to 150 basis points above today's markets. Now, today's markets will bounce around 5, 10, 20 basis points and so forth. But we ran assumptions because in the end, it's about our cost of capital and it's about our debt service, because that's what, when we create the mill rate, we send out tax notices to you all, you have to pay debt service. You don't have to pay sort of bonding, and I think that's what we looked at, and I think, we've worked on a couple, if you all turn maybe to the, I added a new slide here, right, because we've been, there's some questions, and you all would see this. It's a one-page, if you can see that page, it's like F in the supplement. This was meant to show you what
supplemental.
Yes, in the supplemental materials. The first one says projected 5-year tax increase by year. And this one you can see, here's what the median homeowner pays, which is a little over $14,000. And here's where it would get to, and it shows you sort of how the taxes would go up each year. Now again, this shows a 3.1% compounded 5-year growth rate. The F&B, I haven't had a chance to kind of totally sync up with Jack. It's showing just over 3.2. But this gives you an idea of sort of how it layers in, right? And it looks very small because on a percentage basis, it's relatively small. If you flip to the next page, just to help be, sort of uber clear, this zooms in on that graphic and is meant to kind of show you a little bit more how we go from 14,000 to 17,000. And you can see the first year it's relatively small, next year a little bit bigger, but it shows you kind of how those incremental tax increases layer in. So you'll be paying this much this year, and it shows you sort of how it goes up. Kind of a bridge, as we refer to it.
That's just for the debt servicing, is that correct?
No, this is your total taxes.
Okay,
Based
my
on-
taxes seem to be going up.
Well, so,
It's definitely going up.
yeah, so this is, again, this is last year our taxes, let's just say the mill rate, right, went up by 2.3%. So this shows it effectively your taxes going up by 3.1%. And F&B just showed something that was 3.2, right? So, what's helping offset your taxes? If you flip to the next page, and I'd love some feedback on these, try to break it down in terms of what's driving your tax increase, right? Because you said your taxes seem to go up every year, right? So what we try to break.
I don't have, what are the breakouts there? You just.
No, I have extras of these.
I'm just curious what the different colors.
So when you look at what I tried to show here, I think this is helpful, and we'll get this out to other committees here.
Jim, do you have extra? Because I want to give it to some.
I'm good, I'm
Yeah,
good.
you sure?
I've seen it.
Okay, well, this is new.
This is new.
Okay.
So what I'm doing here is I'm showing how does that 3.1% play out over the next 5 years. And you can see on this graphic, I would point everybody to, you see where 0 is. The gray is what I call run rate. That's doing next year basically what we did this year. But our wage rates go up by 2 to 3% depending on what contract each year. Our healthcare services expenses have gone up between kind of 6 to 10%. Those are increasing faster. The price of fuel and just other things. Gray is the run rate. And this is assuming a 2.5% increase, which F&B assumed a little bit higher. The blue shows you what's happening as a result of the school investments that we've made over the last couple of years, right? I think of which everyone would agree is necessary. And this wasn't really talked about during a lot of the approval processes here because everyone views kind of schools as a necessity. And the green on top is for Great Island that shows you sort of what Great Island is adding into it. And on the bottom, the red, that's which I've talked about, we had a declining debt service number each year, and so rather than saying our debt service savings each year is attributable to a school project or a fire truck or to a Great Island or to operating expenses, I just sort of show that in aggregate below the line. So this straight line shows you sort of what's happening to your taxes. That's the 3%, 3.1%, or in the Board of F&B's case, 3.2%, sort of what's happening here. So it's the largest chunk of our increases are driven by operating expenses, and to the extent the school projects and the investment in Great Island, and this also includes about $8 million of extra stuff for Great Island.
So, I'm sorry, why, excuse me, why is Great Island included in both the blue and the green? Is that a typo? Great Island, Oxford, and HHR?
Oh, that's a typo.
Okay.
The blue is supposed to be
Just Oxford and HHR?
HHR, and the green is supposed to be just Great Island.
Okay.
Hey, Jim, is there still, there used to be anyway, a huge amount of demand for bonds, notes and bonds for a town like ours? And is that still, I've been out of it for a long time, but is that still the case? Where would you imagine this paper trades when we bond it, given what you know today?
I think there's 15 natural AAAs in Connecticut out of 169 different towns, right?
Right.
And there's a couple of authorities in there. Among those, we trade, with Greenwich sort of at the very tightest. We're about 25 basis points tighter than New Canaan if you look at sort of in the middle of the curve and so forth like that. So, if you look at issuing a 30-year bond with an average life of around 15 years right now, that would be in the sort of, 3.25 range.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It just in perspective, to give everybody a sense of it, again, I've been out of it for a long time, those are real numbers. The demand for the way we manage and the way the finance guys manage this town and the way the town is sort of built, there's so much demand in the world for this kind of bond.
Our last bond issue was like $35 million. We had we had 12 large banks show up to bid, all within 3 or 4 basis points of each other. So it was relatively, there's strong demand for our paper. I think if you look at it, some of our long-term papers, trading a little bit, they would say cheap, a little bit higher in yield right now, but it's because what's going on in the muni market.
Right.
As you know, like when bonds, lower price bonds, capital appreciation is not tax exempt, interest is, and so there's some technicals in how some of the bonds, what's going on in the bond
So
market.
with no disrespect, I mean, again, this town is rife with municipal debt experts.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I want to get out of the rabbit hole and say we have a nice to have purchase for $100 million, which is going to add ballpark $7 million a year to debt at a run rate over time, not all at once, I get it. So that's the decision we have to make. I mean, it's great, and Jim, we benefit greatly from your knowledge, and Jeff from yours, and from the myriad of people in this town who know how to trade these markets. But the yes/no decision we have to make is whether we want to commit ourselves to this level of debt service, which again, I would remind us is one of the things that's not squeezable when times get tight, right? Contracts and
But
debt
it is
service.
sellable.
Well, with no disrespect to my esteemed colleague here, I don't think that the exit is as easy as he's trying to make it out to be. I think once you lock into doing it, that's hard to undo.
There are 4 other bidders for the same property. 2 of them are developers that would develop it right of the way. Unless the world completely falls apart, we could sell this to a developer tomorrow. I think there'd be, to my esteemed colleague, I don't think that can be argued. I do have one more thing before, and to get out of the muni rattle, but while Jim's here, if there was ever a commission or something that's not a Board of Selectmen committee, and so there was how could you move financing, or could you move financing in a way? Does a public-private partnership, how would you finance something like that? Remind me, is that something that gets done at a town level, or is that something that would be a different entity that would be set up and then bond that entity? Just remind me how that would work.
So there's a couple different things to unpack. Like the town is the only one that can issue bonds.
Right, that's
The
what I
town
thought.
guarantees it, whether it's for the sewer, parks and rec, fire trucks, or whatever. So if you think about sort of, I think what Frank was talking about is like an authority, right? Certain municipalities have the ability to set up authorities and are able to sort of issue bonds and tax, provided that they have enough revenue coming in related to that project to be able to pay all the debt service plus. So I don't think, unless we're charging Disneyland-like rates to get into.
So unless it becomes a revenue.
We wouldn't be able to bond it
Right.
out of another authority. And I think, frankly, it's all gonna be the same mill rate, whether you bond it in set one mill rate or set 2 pieces, which some towns have. So it's not, I don't think there's an ability to create a different commission, and we've spoken to Wayne about it, that sort of has its own revenue, can issue its own bonds, and it basically has an authority unless the revenue is $7 million a year.
So either way.
So again, that's just because it's not what I'm suggesting.
No, I know that. I was asking that just because I wanted to remind myself about the revenue bond piece of it. So either way, the town is backstopping whatever this would be. All right, so that's fine. I just wanted to.
And in the same way, I mean, in the same way that the town backstops what the sewer commission does, right? So no difference. And again, not being a municipal finance expert, I follow this discussion. I couldn't lead this discussion, right? But again, my interest is in the governance of what goes on Great Island and how it impacts the operating budgets of the town cycle after cycle after cycle in the years to come. So I'm interested in segregating that impact.
Yep.
Where the bonds go, maybe I'm blissfully ignorant, but I don't really care.
I think the Board of Finance hasn't approved a project, I think, in 8 years that was over $1 million. That didn't, or maybe $1.2 million, that didn't have sort of a building committee that was set up of experts that were, appointed by the Board of Selectmen, but kind of drew from expertise all over a community, and that has had some type of, sort of professional advisor, architect, engineer, or the so forth. And I think our town, Frank talked about stuff 10, 12 years ago. I think extremely proud of how we've done like the last large 10 projects, and I really think we have it down in terms of the people that we're putting on them, the way that they work with their advisors, the fact that, everything's now broadcast, and the way that they've sort of involved the community. I actually think we get an A+ for the Public Works building, for Oxridge, and how HHR is starting off. I think we're doing a great job.
So can I ask another question? So along those lines, Jim, just it wouldn't affect the financing if we put together a commission just the same way that we have a sewer commission and a police commission, all of those, a commission that then becomes the governance of this entity now, where the dividing points of what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for to be decided. But something like that wouldn't be affected by financing.
Yeah.
Right.
Patrick, that doesn't sort of affect the financial aspect of it, whether you create a building committee, a standing committee, a commission, or whatever you create. They're still going to be, unless we're opening up and redoing the entire town charter to create like a second Parks and Rec commission, they're all going to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and I think can be unappointed by the Board of Selectmen. But I think, I've listened to Monica, I think we've all heard her say it 10 times, that she wants to get the right group of people together to look at this and solicit as much feedback as she can from all 21,500 people. But I can't, that's more governance, and I know from our standpoint, we're gonna wanna make sure any big project has the right eyes on it.
Right. Agreed, thank you.
All right then. I'd ask everybody to put their Public Works hat back on if they can,
Thanks, Jim.
okay? Because.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Jim, do you want to start?
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I'll take it back because it's got a typo on it, and I promise I'll send it around. Sorry.
Sure, no, sorry.
Those were really helpful, thank you.
Those were really helpful. Thank you.
Again, the idea was to show you what's happening in your taxes, not get too complicated and.
Tell Hallie
Clear.
that Public Works will let you get home on time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, as I was saying, try and put your Public Works hat back on, because, that's really what we're together here, is in the interest of Public Works. And so, we need to come to some vote on what our recommendation is to the RTM. Do we recommend the purchase, as in the resolution, or do we not? And so we need to vote on that question. So, I don't think there are, in terms of the immediacy, we got some feedback from Ed about roads, about parking, those things that are immediate requirements in order to open to the public. There's definitely some money involved there, I think there's no question about that, but I don't think these are, insurmountable obstacles per se, both from the work viewpoint, but even from a financial viewpoint. We're not talking about millions and millions of dollars in order.
The roads that he outlined were, if you add up to what he said for the roads.
Yeah, he came to about $1 million.
700,000 to $1 million in just the roads and some minimal parking. And then, again, we discussed some items in the executive session that did not have a price tag attached.
Yes, there are
that will be.
price tags involved with this.
Yeah.
I was very happy to hear about the gravel parking, because that's what I was personally envisioning, is not, kind of.
I missed that. What did he say? How is that gonna work?
He talked about parking pockets. Or
Pockets.
Parking
Yes. So, you got a
pockets,
little
so not
pocket
having
parking
one
here,
giant
little
lot
pocket
in the
parking
middle,
there,
Yeah.
but
not
little
one big
parking
giant
pockets
car.
where there are things going on. So
Right.
by the boathouse, by the stables, by whatever,
Yeah,
but
dispersed.
dispersed, where the people would need to
Just
go.
Just to clarify though, the $1 million that Ed roughly talked about would not need to be spent until we decided to open it to the public. And what Monica said was that, in fact, that will be a while and implied years, multiple.
Right.
No,
So Ian, I think the $1 million to widen the roads and to put in the basic parking was, yes, it's measured in years, but it's not a lot of years. It's a short term, because without that infrastructure, you can't even let people into the property. So I think there's gonna be a demand from people to get in, even if there's not programming on the property.
Until those lease leases, once you start signing multi-year leases, like some of those leases are month to month, and once you start making those codified, they'll be multiple year length. So
Not necessarily.
what I heard Monica say was those leases would have to get signed and then expire before we would allow residents onto the property.
That's not what I
didn't
heard.
That's not what I heard.
No.
What I heard is,
Invest that money until we're allowing residents onto the property.
Ian, what I heard was that the leases that need to get done immediately are the ones that are either verbal agreements or that are month to month, that need to get structured in a way that the town can have as a regular document. But I didn't hear anything from Monica that compelled her to extend either those informal leases or the formal leases that go to March 31st to extend anything beyond March 31st, unless we as a town decide that that's strategically what we want to do.
Yeah, I agree with Frank. I didn't hear anything.
Yeah,
But what I was talking about was that at least the initial thought was to have gravel as the surface, which I thought would be better for drainage, better aesthetically, better for just in keeping with the vibe of the island and not making it
yeah, blacktop.
Disney World, yeah.
And see, I guess,
So I thought that was good from a
so I
public
guess
works.
we can come from different places on that,
Okay.
right? Well, the thing that is still most compelling for me is, I think it was at our meeting last week where somebody passed around the flooding maps of the island.
Rolf loved those.
Rolf, I thought that was excellent, and what that showed is that the area that is the riding ring and the half polo field is most subject to flooding. Again, it's not up to me, it's up to the Great Island Commission or however this is governed, but I would think that you would take that lowest, crappiest spot and make that your Mongol parking lot, so that you don't have, because it's already graded and it's already flat, and it's already been denuded of whatever nature was there. Like, the one personal view, I could, there might be much more sophisticated ways to manage it, but I would put a parking lot at the low point, so that when it floods, you're flooding the parking lot.
If it
Certainly a
floods.
thought of
It will flood.
consideration.
I would say if.
When it floods.
My house is in
vote on
the
this
flood
thing.
zone.
Yeah. So I think we need someone to move these motions, and then.
Do we vote on all
Well,
three?
How do we start?
Well, I mean, there are three resolutions. I don't know if we need to, as a committee, vote on all three. I mean, that will be done certainly in the full RTM meeting. I think the question is more, do we as a committee say that we agree that it should be pursued, that it's a go, so to speak, okay? Go or no go? I'll put it as bottom line as I think I can. I think the first,
So Rolf, you need to make a motion, and the
Yeah,
expresses
well,
go or no go.
and I think the first one that I read basically expresses that sentiment, if you will, about the town, agreeing to pursue the purchase of the property, okay? Any
Are we looking
agreement,
to
disagreement?
be unanimous in our decision?
No, this is, you vote as, again, with your Public Works hat on, okay? As opposed to Monday, you vote with your RTM member hat on, which could be a different hat, okay? Okay, because you're voting on Monday for your constituency in your district, right?
I think
I think I vote tomorrow
Park
with my
and Rec did it the other day and they were unanimous in favor.
Who's that?
Park and
Yes, 6
Recreation.
minute-
Right.
They were
Yes,
unanimous.
6 minute meeting.
Was it 6 minutes?
It was.
Well, we
They had
definitely,
resolutions at that point, so they're voting.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't debate like we've been debating.
all right, so do I have a motion to vote on the resolution of the representative town meeting? Okay, Jeff gives a motion, Lottie gives us a second. Okay, so the motion is,
Do you need a
Are
rest
you
before this
okay?
whole thing?
Give me a minute.
I know, I just.
I got it saved.
I'm-
all right,
No, it's fine. Okay.
all right, so just to be clear, the motion is to vote on the resolution, correct? Okay, for the representative town of Darien to consider and approve the purchase of property commonly known as the Great Island. I'm not gonna go through and read all those lines again, but that's basically what we're voting on, okay? So, all those who are in favor of the resolution, raise your hand. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Okay, did you
I recorded that,
get a
yes.
note of all those who voted for?
Did you vote against?
I did not vote for.
Okay. Are you abstaining?
That's very political.
Anybody who,
Can you abstain?
Yes.
I could abstain, yes.
Did you abstain?
I haven't gotten there
Where-
yet.
Depends on people, what come up.
Anybody who votes against the resolution to purchase Great Island, please raise your hand.
Okay.
Okay, Jackie Miller, thank you, duly noted. Anybody abstaining from the vote for the purchase of the Great Island,
Franken.
raise your hand. I'm gonna reserve my vote for the RTM.
As am I.
I'll say I was going to abstain, but I think some of the discussion here tonight swayed me.
Had an
Yes.
influence?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm glad we met last week. I'm glad we met this week.
Yeah, I apologize,
Yeah.
I know this was a lot, it might seem somewhat redundant, but at the same time, this is probably the largest purchase in the history of the town, so.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it was worth the time to think about.
It would be hard to find something that's more expensive.
Yeah.
That's
Well-
available for sale.
When we brought New Canaan,
Yeah.
That's
You know,
next
just
on our
for my
agenda.
own, I know we voted, and that's in the record, but from my own perspective, I'm up for buying it. I'm okay for the debt service. Where I have a problem is the operating costs and any other capital expenditures for the improvement of the island. There's where I kind of have a line. I would like to see this be a totally independent, financially self-sustaining
Agreed.
entity, okay? And that, yes, the town would backdrop it, but only as a last resort. That every possibility of this operating onto itself would be totally exploited before we ever got to that point.
I think a lot of people
Well,
feel
if
the
you're in
same
favor
way.
of that,
We
Rolf,
make that
and I'm in favor of that as well.
recommendation? Yeah.
And
I'm in favor of
Jeff
that
has
too.
also. So then, let me ad hoc, just try to make a motion here, that as the sense of our, I'm gonna propose a motion,
Okay?
as the sense of our meeting,
Okay?
that regardless of whether we voted for, against, or abstained on this particular resolution, that we strongly recommend to the RTM and the Board of Selectmen that they establish an independent commission to manage the affairs of Great Island that will segregate the operations and the finances of this acquisition as much as practicable from the existing legacy financial processes and political processes in the town. So that we get to the best long-term strategic solution for what should go on the island and how it should be managed. So that's the motion I'd make. And Jackie, I'm sure that you'll be able to get that off Channel 79.
That's good.
Okay? So I'm sorry I didn't have
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Well, you expect something from me, come on, Rolf.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make that as a motion, would anyone second that?
Okay, we have
Thank you.
2 seconds.
Okay, so at this point, I want to take your, we debate it.
All right,
But
you
we
want,
debated it.
you think I'm gonna repeat that?
For the benefit of those of us that can't see, could you just read off who voted for, against, and abstained? I didn't quite get that.
4 was Paige, Eric, Jeff, Carrie, and Waddy. No was Jackie. Abstaining was Frank and Rolf.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And just as a corollary to that, because I didn't write down Frank's motion.
No one did.
Is
Okay.
this meeting being recorded?
Yes.
It
Yes,
is
it
being
is, yeah.
recorded.
Okay, it's just not live streaming. Okay, got it.
Right.
Correct.
It says, yeah, it's not streaming.
Thank you.
So again, the motion is to
Yeah,
have an
summarize.
So the motion is to have an independent Great Island Commission to segregate the governance of Great Island, both operational governance and financial management, from the current affairs of the town. It will be a stronger committee, a stronger commission than simply a committee of the Board of Selectmen. And we're recommending to the RTM and to the Board of Selectmen that be the governance mechanism used to manage Great Island.
Okay, so we have a motion on the
So that's
floor.
the motion that's been seconded.
Yes,
Yes.
so the motion is open to discussion before we vote. Okay,
So I know I don't get to vote because I'm not there in person, but I am very much in favor of Frank's motion.
okay, so we have Ian's sentiment in regards to the motion. Thank you, Ian. Anybody else want to comment on the motion?
It sounded to me,
I'll
go ahead,
follow
Patrick.
So we'll get the guys on the phone out of the way here.
Yeah.
I understand, Frank, what you're suggesting, and in many ways, I agree with you. I think we then get into a level of practicality that it's just, I think it's going to be very difficult to structure something like that short of this going over to like the Parks and Rec Commission, where they are separately operated. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do. I agree with you, because I think one of the things that you're suggesting is that we want to keep this as apolitical as possible and with a long-term view, and for all of those reasons. And that I agree with. I just think that there's an impracticality to it that I think makes it difficult.
May I respond to that?
I mean, we're still in an open comment portion of this motion, so.
So Patrick, I'll very quickly respond to that. I think what you're describing as the practicality is why I didn't come with a printed motion tonight to actually put in front of people, because I don't see a practical way to get something in front of the RTM that is enforceable and is worth the paper it's written on before next Monday. So I tried mightily on that and did not succeed. But as a sense of the meeting, as what we want to respond to as what we want to recommend to the RTM and to the Board of Selectmen, I think we're free to do that at any time. And so that's what we're doing here.
Yeah,
From a budgeting standpoint, it makes sense to have its own, because it has these income sources. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made, and I think it's more practical to, I don't know, to do it that way.
I mean, honestly, I would think that the commission, should it exist, would hire somebody as a full-time manager for Great Island.
That's it. It already has full-time employees, right?
Yes.
So like,
I think Monica said that that's what the intent would be, is to hire a consultant or something like they're already doing with other projects.
Well, a consultant's different. I mean, we've had
That's
consultants
true.
before, but that's different from
That's
like
true.
a property manager.
A property manager, exactly.
yeah, land management, so to speak.
Yeah. But I want to stick to the motion and make sure we make a decision on that.
Does anybody else have any comments, input, criticisms?
The only thing I heard from Mr. Palin, which goes to Patrick's not being a practical thing, and Frank, to your point of not being able to put something in front of the RTM that's going to go anywhere, is that there is no way in the law, in the charter of the town right now to create that commission. All commissions, at least what I heard from Jim, and I might be totally wrong, you know this better than I do, is that they all are Board of Selectmen committees that can be taken away. And is that the case with sewer too?
Yeah, the sewer.
So they're all, yes, they're all ultimately nominated by the selectmen.
Right.
The difference is the sewer commission that was called into being under certain state statutes.
Right.
And exists under the charter of the town and is a much more structured and institutional body. As opposed to, say, the HHR Building Commission, which if the Board of Selectmen don't like how it's going, they can disband it.
But we're not gonna put a state charter, we're not gonna put a
I'm
state
not-
structure around this new commission, so wouldn't that then make it more look like the HHR committee? I'm just saying, I think Patrick's right. I agree with the sense of where we're trying to go with this, totally. And I think maybe since they're creating a fund, that's gonna have its own sort of controls, maybe they're thinking about it already. But
Yeah.
it sounded from Jim that it's gonna be, like, we're gonna bang our heads against the wall. How about if we get at it the other way, which is the people basically get to a point where they do create this, Friends of Great Island or whatever the deal is, and we create an entity that takes up some of this funding and takes up some of the donations and gets some of these expenses off of the table. It may not be the formal commission that runs it. I don't know. I'm just saying, it sounds to me like it's gonna be hard from Patrick's standpoint.
Some hard things are worth trying for.
No, I agree, but so I'm for that all the time, I do it all day long.
Right.
But this is, we're basically stating a sense of where we are with it, knowing that it's really not gonna go anywhere, so we're just sort of giving.
No, I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree. So,
I mean, I don't
first of
wanna.
all, first of all, I
Sorry,
think,
I would push a little more on this too, which is to say, I think the Friends of Great Island or whatever, we should do in addition.
Right, no, me too, and I
Right,
totally,
because-
I think that's where I'm kinda coming out with, there should be a Friends of Great Island set up like tomorrow.
so just to respond, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to propose a whole bunch of technical solutions or a whole bunch of resolutions until we're aligned on the objectives.
Right.
What I've outlined in this motion are the objectives. I think we should be segregating the governance and the financials from the rest of the business of the town at a high level, right? To make it less volatile, to make it more transparent financially, for a whole bunch of reasons.
And the way they want to set it up
Now,
doesn't do that.
once we agree on those objectives, and we recommend those objectives to the RTM and the town, there are a few different ways to get there. If we as a town are agreed on objectives, we have a bunch of really smart people, and I'm sure that we can achieve that together. If people don't agree on the objectives, then me proposing one thing or
No, I
another
think
is
the
ridiculous.
objectives, I think everybody kind of feels about the objectives, I'm just not sure. I think I understand exactly where you're going and exactly how this works with the town now, so I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine, I understand.
Rolf, you have thoughts, I'm sure?
Well, I just started out with a premise, which is kind of morphed a little bit, okay? I'm looking, again, going back to what I initially said was, I'm looking for an independent operation that manages unto itself within its own financial assets and capabilities that they can draw from that great island, okay? And I'm looking for them to do that to cover hopefully 100% of both their regular operating costs as well as any investments in capital improvements. And that, yes, the town would back them, but only in the instance where it's absolutely necessary because they've exploited to the fullest extent all of the possibilities in that regard before we have to put up a dime, okay? And that would have to be approved by the town. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I wish that would happen too, Rolf.
Okay. So, I don't know, you know,
don't see that.
so the thing about creating an independent commission, I understand where you're coming from. Again, I don't know if that's gonna have any legs, so to speak, with people in general. I think they'll be intrigued by the premise, but I don't know in practicalities with Wayne Fox and the legalese, whether that can really be
You
done.
just said that they have a model in Waveney, and I don't know the first thing about the Waveney example you just
I don't either. That's something I think,
From what Monica said, it sounded like it's a committee from the Board of Selectmen
well,
in Waverly.
It sounded like it was
No,
more
no,
institutional than
that's
that.
not right. I think, it's a Friends of Waveney or something along those lines that, it influences the, and it's exterior only, so it doesn't really manage the main buildings. It really is intended to just manage the property itself. But the town backstops it, the town does a lot of the work. I think, if I understand what everybody is saying, and I have to agree, the Friends of Great Island would be more, not only design and manage, but also to help to fund the repairs and programming. Yes?
Yeah, to me, Patrick, that's what I kind of have in my mind. I mean, it's like,
I mean, we're all building castles in the air by what we imagine, but none of this is what Monica actually said.
no.
yeah, well,
it's just,
I think a lot, on Monday, I think it's gonna come in, as I see it right now, the way it's developing, I think it's gonna be just a leap of faith.
Yeah. Trust
Right.
fall.
No
So,
question.
so before we get onto that leap of faith, I think we need to have a vote or more discussion on the motion
Okay.
on the floor.
Okay. Do we have a clear understanding of what's on the floor?
Can we like
Everybody's
make it
kinda
more?
like-
Can we make it more concise so that it's not
Can we crystallize this a little better?
sentences? Maybe 3 sentences.
I mean, so what I have cobbled together.
Yeah, what did you
Yes,
write?
thank you, Secretary.
We strongly recommend an independent commission to manage the affairs of Great Island that will segregate the financial and operational management of the island from the rest of the business of the town.
That's a good summary right
That's
there.
super concise. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Does everybody accept that as a statement of the motion? Okay, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, we have 7 out of 8 people saying yes. Anybody voting against this? Anybody abstaining? Okay, we have 1 abstention.
I would have abstained if I were there.
All right, Patrick,
Interesting historical point.
duly noted.
Yeah, you should have told me.
All right, so I'm
You're
gonna,
buying the beers.
I'm gonna put together a brief, whatever, dissertation to present to the RTM about how we see the state of the property, so to speak, from a public works perspective, and our recommendation relative to the purchase of the island. And then I'm also going to include with that the motion that was just voted on, so I'll need that verbiage. Thank you. And that'll be my presentation basically on Monday, okay? Anybody have any other suggestions, comments,
Thank you.
input?
Great work.
I just want to say, as the no vote on the initial resolution, as an individual, I am still on the fence. I've heard both opinions from my constituents. I feel like as a member of this committee, and I'm a new member of this committee, I don't have enough information to make a recommendation. So maybe that would have been better an abstention than a no, but I just wanted to say, explain my vote.
Okay.
And that's it.
And that's legit.
Thank you.
Okay,
I do think if it was managed separately, all the finances, it would get rid of a lot of those questions of like, do we spend on this, or do we get a new interior designer hired for the Great Island House, like it would
Interior
get rid
designer.
of. I'm
For the
just-
bed and breakfast.
Ridiculousness, for the better, yeah, so it would just get rid of all of that, like,
I got.
Yeah,
decision making.
I'm
Patrick, I'm hanging up on you.
I'm afraid of budget wars.
That's it.
I just don't want to see
It would
budget
get, it
wars.
would get rid of that, and I think
I want
it
to stop
would.
all wars.
That's it.
Yes, and if there's no other business,
Yes,
motion to
sorry.
adjourn, Frank
Motion to adjourn.
Abrams, seconded, Carrie, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned, thank you, Channel 79.
We'll see everybody Monday.